Welcome to episode 205 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from our virtual studio on the internet by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who is sheltering in place today, John Scott Sloat.
Doc, what's happening?
Well, we've got a lot to talk about today in terms of the sports realm of things, but you are joining us from your basement, I believe. Yes.
Yep. I got a virus that ends in a number, and I've been told by the HR department I'm not allowed to leave the house for a while. So
Okay.
Here we are.
There you go.
Here we are. No fever, pretty mild. I may cough once or twice on the pod, but our high-level editing folks will get that out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Those our team of editors.
Yeah,
will absolutely take care of that. So, yes, indeed. So, but you're able to work from home, even though, I mean,
I was supposed to be on the road this week, so I'm supposed
Right.
to be in Roanoke right now. So I'm clearly not in Roanoke meeting with people, but I'm able to do quite a bit from home.
Yeah.
So we'll do some phone calls, set up some meetings for next week, and see what happens. Go from there.
There you go. Well, if you would like to reach out to the show, you can find us on Twitter at V&S You can email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, and we would love for you to leave a 5-star rating of the program. So, without any further delay, let's jump into sports. John, actually, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here and have us start with the NFL, because I think there'll be more to talk about on the college football end of things. So let's start with your beloved Jets. They lost 13-8. Is that right?
Yeah, the halftime score was 10-5.
Yeah.
The Jets are unwatchable at the current moment.
Yes. It's a struggle, to say the least.
Yes, they started Tim Boyle. Hashtag let him boil was the hashtag. And he didn't even simmer. So they went to Trevor Siemian, which is our fourth quarterback of the year.
Yes.
And that's back-to-back years we've used four quarterbacks, and 3 of the last 4 years we've used four quarterbacks.
Yeah.
That's not good.
That's typically not a recipe for winning.
No, it's not. So we're in the wilderness. We have Aaron Rodgers coming back next year, supposedly, and he's the only reason the GM, the coach, and the offensive coordinator continue to have a job, as far as I can tell. This is sort of the year they were supposed to make the playoffs. They're supposed to do something if they wanted to keep their jobs, and they just haven't done it. Now maybe Ron fixes everything, but I don't know that he fixes everything. Maybe he fixes. Maybe covers all multitude of sins there, but who knows?
Well, with an off season available to you, you can obviously shore up the offensive line, as well as getting Aaron back. Maybe through the draft or through some free agency, even through some trades, you might be able to shore up the offensive line to make it a little bit sturdier for whoever's starting at quarterback for you.
Yeah. And we have a decent offensive line. I think we've been decimated by injuries. So we have a guy, Joe Tittman, who graduated from Wisconsin, but went to high school in Fort Wayne, Indiana, actually.
There you go.
Who allowed 0 pressures yesterday and 42 passing attempts. So there's reason for hope. Elijah Vera Tucker is very, very good, first-round guard, but he keeps getting injured, keeps hurting himself.
Yep.
Becton has played pretty well at tackle this year. They just can't put it all together.
Yeah. It's been a shockingly bad season for the Jets, primarily because of injury, right? I think that's probably fair.
I think so. Yeah. And they cannot find Garrett Wilson open.
Yes.
It's not that he isn't open. He is open.
Yes.
They cannot get him the ball.
Yeah.
I was watching the 49ers Eagles, and they just give Deebo Samuel the ball in the most interesting ways. They run a reverse, they do a bubble screen, they throw it deep, they run a crossing pattern. I mean, they find like 7-8 different ways to get him the ball. They're not doing that.
No. Any other NFL games catch your attention this weekend?
Packers beat the Chiefs. That was a big game. First loss with Taylor Swift in attendance for the Chiefs.
That's tough. I
know.
We'll have to shake that off.
And then 49ers trounced the Eagles in Philadelphia. And that was pretty.
Well, and what's crazy, they won like 42 to 19 or something like that?
Something like that. They dominated.
But at the end of the first quarter, I think the score was like 6-0 Eagles. Like the 49ers did not show up in the first quarter.
That's right.
And then in the last three quarters, they absolutely blew the doors off of Philly.
Yep, 100%.
And funny just to watch Philly fans, like Philadelphia was 10-1 going into that game. So now they're 10-2.
And so their only losses have been to Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
And?
I don't know who else they lost to now.
Zach Wilson.
That's right. Okay. So, but it's just striking. Those Philly fans are hardcore. Like they were booing a 10-1 team at home. You know, like I get being dissatisfied, but man, those Philly fans.
They booed Santa on Christmas. Let's not forget.
Yeah.
How do you boo Santa on Christmas?
I don't know. All right, ready to talk some college football here?
Are you ready to talk some college football?
I am ready. I have hot takes.
Well, Matt, give me the rundown.
So the starting point, obviously, is this past weekend was championship weekend, conference championship weekend. And so the result that really the one result that threw things into chaos was Alabama beating Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan won, Washington won, Florida State won. So all three of those teams are unbeaten. Texas won as well. And so the issue came down to, Michigan and Washington, everyone knew they were locks. So after the game Saturday night, the debate was starting on, okay, so Florida State, they did beat Louisville with their third string quarterback, but it was like 16-6. They did not look good at all, but their defense was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And they had their star quarterback got hurt like 2 games ago, and he was lights out. He was dynamic. And so when he got hurt, that certainly brought about some major changes to them. Well, long story short, the playoff committee basically took, for the 4 teams, they took Michigan and Washington. That was a no surprise there. But they took Texas, who beat Alabama. They were a 1-loss conference champion from the Big 12. And then they took Bama as the 4th spot, leaving an undefeated Florida State team out of the playoff. A Power 5 team went unbeaten in their conference and played out of conference and beat LSU on the road. And still, they did not get in.
Yeah, that's no good.
And of course, there's all the accusations of the SEC bias and that kind of thing. And there's certainly elements of truth to that. But
Texas is Texas set to join the SEC? Is that happening
next year? Yes.
Yeah.
Next
so it's
year.
almost like you have 2 SEC teams in there.
Almost, yes. Yeah. Well, and it just shows the inequity of college football in terms of it's all about, in some ways, when you lose, right? If you lose early in the year, you're still okay. You lose late in the year and you're in deep trouble. Alabama is a fluke play away from not even being in the playoff, because those who watch college football will remember last week they played their rival Auburn and trailed by 4 points and had to convert a 4th and goal from the Auburn 31-yard line as time expired in order to win that game.
Yep.
So thanks, Auburn, for not being able to play defense on 4th and goal from the 31. Everybody in Florida now hates you with a burning passion. Though, honestly, if that had happened and Georgia lost to Bama,
I think
Georgia might have gotten the 4th spot instead of Florida State.
I think that's right. Yeah, Georgia was pretty upset they weren't in.
Yeah.
No
one's going to cry for them. No one's going to cry for them.
Florida State has legitimate frustration.
100%, yes.
Legitimate frustration.
Now, next year they're going to go to a 12-team playoff, and so this wouldn't have mattered if this is the scenario next year. But what is striking is, again, just that they did not put in an undefeated Power 5 conference team who won their conference. And it's just, this would have been a great year for an 8-team playoff. I think the difference between 1 and 8 is razor thin. I mean, think of it this way. Ohio State is ranked 7th. They lost on the road by 1 score against the number 1 team in the country, Michigan. They're ranked 7th.
Yeah.
Georgia lost by 3 to Bama, and they dropped all the way to 5. I mean, or 6. I think they dropped to 6. Anyway, like the margin between 1 and 8, if they had an 18 playoff this year, it would be amazing television. So basically the semifinals are set then. You've got Michigan against Alabama, which there's a really funny clip on Twitter of when they revealed the 4th team. They were showing Michigan's reaction. And there was an audible gasp in the room when it was revealed they were playing Bama rather than Florida State with their 2nd or 3rd string quarterback. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Pretty funny.
Well, and Bama has a history of being very, very good.
I mean, the line started with Michigan as favored by 2.5, and it dropped almost instantly to Michigan by 1.5. And it wouldn't surprise me if by the end, but when they play, that it's either a toss-up or even Bama by a little bit.
Do you remember, I think it was University of Central Florida, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, went undefeated and declared themselves national champions.
Yes, they
basically had a parade through, I think they're in Tampa. I think Florida State needs to do the same thing if they win their bowl game. Who did they pull for their bowl game?
Well, they play Georgia.
Okay.
So, quite frankly, if they beat Georgia,
they can do it.
Go ahead and throw the parade. Throw the parade.
That feels intentional by the bowl people out there.
Yeah, it feels that way too. And then, the semifinals are Michigan against Alabama and then Washington and Texas. I think both those games should be really entertaining.
Yeah, there's a Grace College connection with Washington. We have an alum who works in their sports information department there at Washington.
I think I knew that. Yeah. Other college football news is that today, we're recording on a Monday, is the opening of the transfer portal in college football. And it's the Wild West out there, John. And Ohio State has lost a few players already. As of when we're recording this afternoon, I think they've had, around 10 players opting into the transfer portal.
Wow.
Most notably, starting quarterback Kyle McCord.
Really?
Entered the transfer portal, yes. See, yesterday, Ryan Day had a press conference, and he was asked if he would commit to Kyle McCord as his starter for next year. And Ryan Day basically said, I'm not ready to say that.
Yeah.
So he's out of there. The other two other big notes on this. Julian Fleming, starting wide receiver, fourth-year guy, is entering the transfer portal as well.
Okay.
And then they've got like 3 or 4 defensive backs, like backups, like who are entering the portal as well. So there's some turnover, and all of that is going to make it interesting how they end up playing against Missouri in their bowl game, in the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah.
That's who they've got.
Will they get many transfers?
I think they will probably get a transfer quarterback.
Okay.
And I think they will look to add defensive linemen. There's a 5-star defensive lineman from Texas A&M that entered the portal.
Okay.
They'll probably go after him. And there's a couple of offensive tackles that I think they'll go after as well. So it'll be interesting. Playing against Missouri in the bowl game, I'm just not. That's a matchup that I don't think Ohio State's going to care that much about, and it's going to mean everything to Missouri. So you've got the motivation gap when it comes to that matchup. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. I was talking to someone about this. I still love college football. I still think it's the best sport, but I'm not a fan of what it's becoming with the name, image, likeness stuff, as well as the transfer portal stuff. I just don't enjoy what it's becoming. I think it's taking on the least attractive aspects of professional football and leaving behind some of the more attractive elements of college football.
Yeah.
All right. We should probably move on to other things, things that other listeners may actually be interested in. I think some of our listeners,
they're not interested in Matt Harmon's feelings on the changing nature of college football.
There's at least some that aren't. That's for sure. So you ready to move on?
Sure.
Today we're continuing our Advent series on some key Old Testament allusions or citations that help inform some of the birth narratives of Jesus found in either Matthew or Luke. And so last week we talked about the allusion to Numbers 24 in the opening lines of Matthew 2, referring to the star. And we're going to continue in Matthew 2 today by looking at the direct quotation from Micah 5, verse 2. So, John, let's go ahead and have you read verses. Let's just go 1 through 6. I think we can start there.
1 to 6?
In Matthew 2, yep.
Okay. Matthew 2, verses 1 to 6. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And here's your quotation, verse 6. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.
Okay, so that is a quotation from Micah 5:2. And before we jump back to Micah, we should just kind of talk briefly about the context. It's interesting that what prompts this is the visit of the wise men. And
these guys would have been Persian. Is that my understanding?
Probably, yeah. Yep.
And so probably would have known of Israel from the diaspora, but how are they coming across this? From the exile, is that where they
Yeah,
know?
realistically, from the exile, it was the Babylonians who took over and took the southern kingdom of Judah into exile. And so, and then while they were in exile, the Persians conquered the Babylonians. And while some of the Jews went back to the land of Israel, many of them stayed in Persia.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a result, I think they would have been aware of just some of these Old Testament expectations and hopes that the Jewish people had of this coming king.
And they suss it out. They're able to figure this out.
Well, it's based on apparently the star, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be, that's what they identify as, hey, we saw his star. And so we followed it, and now we're here in Jerusalem. And so there's clearly some sort of connection there, even with their reading of astronomy. And it's really a fascinating kind of, how do you fill in the gaps of them getting there?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think what is noteworthy, though, is that when they arrive in Jerusalem and they ask this question about, basically, where's the king of the Jews? And that basically Herod has to assemble the chief priests and scribes to ask, where was the Christ to be born? And they had to go, in essence, look it up.
Yeah. I think that strikes me as really interesting in this passage, that Herod doesn't gather his own wise men. He gathers, like, give me the Jews, give me the Israelites who know this stuff. And they, in essence, conspire with Herod in this.
Yeah. They identify this passage out of Micah 5:2. So let's take a little trip back to Micah 5:2 to figure out kind of what's going on back there. Let's see, Micah 5:2. And I think, John, we'll start reading here. Actually, we're going to start back in chapter 4.
Okay.
And I want you to read verses 6 through 8 first. Do that. So Micah 4, 6 through 8.
Okay. In that day, declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away, and those whom I have afflicted, and the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation, and the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion, from this time forth and forevermore. And you, O tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you shall it come. The former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem.
All right. So now then jump down to Micah 5, and let's read verses 2 through 4.
Yeah, you had to give me a great name in there, huh?
I did.
But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah. How'd I do there?
Ephrathah.
Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient of days. Therefore he shall give them up until his time, when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel. And you said verse 4 as well?
Yes.
And he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord. in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall dwell secure. For now he shall be great to the ends of the earth.
Yeah, so you see, just within the larger context here of Micah, there's this hope for restoration from exile through this king from David's line, and in particular, that this king will come from Bethlehem, which is a bit of a, not necessarily a surprise, but sort of a surprise. It's not a surprise in that that's where David was from.
Yeah, I was about to say.
But despite that, Bethlehem was never a big city, a big town. It was close enough to Jerusalem. I mean, especially today, in light of modern transportation. I mean, when you go to Jerusalem today, it's just a short little drive to get to Bethlehem from the outskirts of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
But even back then, it wasn't that far away. And yet, it really was never that large of a town. Just kind of a more of a, not even a suburb of Jerusalem at that point. Just kind of a small little village, not really that prominent. And so, you're announcing the arrival of this king coming from this small, seemingly insignificant town, other than the fact, of course, that it's associated with David. Another thing to pay attention to here is, although the quote is from Micah 5:2, Matthew does pull a line from Micah 5:4, that line about shepherding my people Israel. That's not in Micah 5:2. That's actually borrowed from Micah 5:4. And I think part of what's important to see here is this promise is connected to promises of dominion and is tied ultimately to the promise of a ruler from Judah, right? So it's that kind of associations that I think make us need to ask, so then what earlier texts of scripture is this building upon? Because as we saw even last week, these promises don't occur in isolation. They tend to build upon one another.
Right, they're interconnected.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you consider what's going on in those Micah texts, I mean, one obvious background here is, in fact, 2 Samuel 7. I mean, that's kind of the backbone there. That's the text where God makes his promise to David of a descendant who's going to rule over an eternal kingdom, and that descendant is actually going to rule in a way that is the fulfillment of earlier promises of Scripture itself, which go back to Genesis 49, which we looked at last week in terms of the promise of the scepter not departing from Jacob, and ultimately back to Genesis 12, 1 through 3, God's initial promise to Abraham. And then, when you pick up ideas of dominion, ultimately you're getting back into Genesis 1.
Yeah.
And so when you understand this promise in Micah 5 against that backdrop, I think part of what you see is that this promised ruler, this shepherd from David's line, is not just intended to rule over Israel. He's intended to rule over creation. And that this promise, which I think when you look in 2 Samuel 7, this is pretty evident too, that the promise extends not just for the people of Israel, but ultimately to any and all who align themselves with this promised descendant.
Just one point of clarity on what you said there.
Yep.
When you were talking about, because I initially thought of Genesis 49 as well, where and you said the scepter shall not depart from Jacob. Isn't it Judah in that
Judah.
passage?
I thought I
Okay.
said Judah.
Okay.
Maybe I misspoke.
Maybe I misheard you. But it seems like that gets extended here a little bit, right?
Sure.
Like even it seems like there's going to be a ruler from Judah, or Judah's line is going to be rulers of some kind, and it seems like it's going to it's going to be from the land of Judah, or from the rulers of Judah. Like it's getting extended to the whole tribe there, not just the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you look into Micah 5:2, even that expression at the end of 5:2 there, he used to be a ruler in Israel whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. And even that expression, raises questions, right? I mean, when you read that text in one sense canonically, you see, this is hinting at the eternal nature of this king, that he's more than just a human king. But it's striking, and I think this text. So Micah, basically an 8th century prophet. This set of promises, I think, gets picked up and developed later in Ezekiel. So in Ezekiel 34, which these promises come roughly, 150, 200 years after Micah. In Ezekiel 34, you get this remarkable statement about Israel's future hope. Ezekiel 34, and this is verses 23 and 24. It says this. Well, actually, let's back up. This is what's striking. Let me back up here. This is Ezekiel 34, but let's start back in verse 15. This is Yahweh speaking. He says, I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I myself will make them lie down, declares the Lord God. I will seek the lost, and I will bring back the strayed, and I will bind up the injured, and I will strengthen the weak, and the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them in justice. Now jump down to verse 22. I will rescue my flock. They shall no longer be a prey, and I will judge between sheep and sheep. And I will set over them one shepherd, my servant David. And he shall feed them and be their shepherd. And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David shall be prince among them. I am the Lord, I have spoken. So what's fascinating here in this Ezekiel text is it seems to be building in one sense on the Micah text and saying, or at least raises the question, so who's going to do the shepherding of God's people? At first it's like, it's Yahweh. He's going to do it. He's like, but then it's David as well. And you could understand that simply as, well, God leads through his king. God cares for his people through his king.
Mm-hmm.
But in light of what the New Testament teaches, it's hard not to see the sort of the incarnation, the dual nature of Christ, the humanity as well as the deity of Jesus, so that this shepherd is actually both God in the flesh and fully human descendant of David.
Yes, particularly the way Matthew runs through his genealogy at the outset of his gospel, right? Connecting Jesus all the way back to David.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, you get these texts coming together to help Matthew then present Jesus as this promised Davidic king, which is intended to be a contrast in the context of Matthew 2 to the so-called king, Herod.
Yes.
And that one king is ruling by domination and power and fear, and this new king who is born, we don't know this yet, but it's going to become apparent, he's going to rule in a completely different way. So it's this very strong contrast that shows up there in Matthew 2, and will continue on throughout the rest of Matthew's gospel.
Well, and I don't think you intend to go here, but I intend to go here. Is that I do think there's some parallelism being drawn here by Matthew with Herod and Pharaoh, ultimately as well. Like going back to Exodus. I mean, we're going to see in a little bit that he is going to send out his people to kill all the baby boys, right, of Bethlehem, to kill them, much as Pharaoh did. And so I think there's even a parallelism there about Jesus.
For sure.
Exodus as well.
And it's certainly setting that up, that even when you read Matthew 2 there, you can see the duplicitousness of Herod when it's like, oh, well, when you find them, please let us know so we can worship him too. Like, the reader knows Herod doesn't want to worship the new king. He wants to kill him. He wants to destroy him because he's a threat.
Yeah. He's a nutcase, really, Herod.
He is. I remember when we were in Israel, one of our tour guides loved to say, Herod the Great was a horrible human being and a total nutcase, but without him, I may not have a job today. Because basically, Herod was responsible for building so many things around the land of Israel that you today can go see ruins of or parts of. So, yes, the love-hate relationship of Herod continues.
Oh yeah. Well, and in light of Herod coming up and soon killing all these Jewish children, I can't help but reflect on the chief priests and the scribes of the people helped him in this discovery quest as well. That's never stuck out to me as much as it has in this passage here.
Yeah, I mean, I think just by itself, you could potentially say, well, Herod asked and they answered a question.
Yeah.
But when you look at how the rest of Matthew's gospel presents the posture of the chief priests and the scribes towards Jesus, it's hard not to see that as anticipating their own opposition to Jesus later on.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So, well, there's a little trip through a second. This one's actually a citation, not an allusion like last time. And again, part of the heart behind this series is, I think that going back to, Luke 1 and 2 and Matthew 1 and 2 every year can get a little can potentially get a little stale, because you can feel like, oh, well, I know the story. But when you dig deeper into the Old Testament allusions and citations, it brings out some of the richness of what the biblical authors are trying to show you indirectly about Jesus and prepare you for what you're going to read as the gospel accounts unfold. All right, John, you ready to move on?
I sure am.
Time now for This Day in Sports History.
Okay, This Day in Sports History, December 5th, 2023 is this year. But let's go back to 1956. Danish yachtsman Paul Elvstrøm.
Elvstrøm. I think that's an ELV. There you go. Elvstrøm
wins the Finn class gold medal at the Melbourne Olympics, his second straight Finn gold and third consecutive Olympic gold in sailing. Huh. Interesting. What is a Finn class gold?
That's a great question.
Because at first I went, oh, he's Finnish.
Right.
But then I realized the start of the sentence says he's Danish.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know that apparently there's a whole classification of sailing Is that Finn in the like Finnish, like Finn of Finland, or is that some other term?
The sailing invented by the Finns,
Which, yeah, I don't know.
conquered by the Danish. Anyway, also in 1956, Soviet artistic gymnast Larisa Latinina wins the women's vault and ties for gold in the floor exercise at the Melbourne Olympics. Later takes gold total to 4 with teams and individual all-around titles. So 4 gold medals.
Not bad.
You were shaking your head at my pronunciation there. Were you not a fan?
No, I think you got that right. I think
You think I got
Larissa
it right? Okay.
Latinina.
Yeah. Okay. 1959, future Pakistan cricket captain. Yeah, I'm not going to get these. Intakib Alam bowls Australian opener Colin McDonald. I got that one. With his first ball in the Test cricket in a draw, third Test in Karachi.
Yeah. Epic.
Yeah, indeed. 1959. 2008. I know this one. Former NFL star O.J. Simpson is sentenced to 33 years in prison for kidnapping and armed robbery, which he has since been paroled for.
Yes.
And he's out. He's out in the world and on Twitter.
And presumably still looking for the real killers.
Apparently, yeah. Hello, Twitter. Hello, Twitter world. 2016, this is the last one. I remember this too. Klay Thompson scores 60 points in 29 minutes while only taking 11 dribbles in a 142-106 win over the Pacers.
Yeah. That's really remarkable given just the way the NBA works these days in terms of being more ball dominant scoring, right? Where guys ISO and it's like dribble, shot. All the Klay stuff was coming off screens and working away from the ball. It's pretty remarkable. 60 points is a lot of points, and only 11. And he did it in 29 minutes. He didn't play the fourth quarter of that game because it was already so out of hand.
Well, he could have missed. He just could have missed that game. Quite a player.
So, who do you like out of that list?
Truthfully, I'm probably Klay Thompson here.
I think I am agreeing with you. I think Klay Thompson is the way to go here. So,
yeah, he's quite good.
Yes, he is. One thing you liked.
All right, so I just started a new show that's it's based on a book, but it's a 4-part limited series on Netflix. I just started. I've only watched the first one. Wonderfully well shot, has a lot of stars in it, and really, really good so far. I'm excited to watch the rest of it, but I'll go ahead and put it down as my one thing. Like All the Light We Cannot See, which is based on a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes place in World War II, and it's about right now it's about this blind girl who has a radio program that is passing on messages to the American and British forces while she is stuck in occupied France with the Nazis. And so she's putting out these messages, I think unbeknownst to her, but they're using, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to communicate it. And so right now it's pretty interesting. We'll see how it goes. The first episode was very, very well done, but it's got Mark Ruffalo in it, who played the Hulk, and it's got Hugh Laurie in it, who played House. If you remember that TV show, House. Yep. So a bunch of Englishmen and Americans playing French people.
There you go.
With no accents. That's probably the most, like, they just lean into the English, although there's French flags everywhere. There's no French accent whatsoever.
Yeah. My wife read that book.
Oh, did she? Did she enjoy it?
She did, very much.
Okay. Well, there's a Netflix limited series that I'm watching right now.
Yeah.
The first episode certainly had bombings and things like that, like certainly gratuitous violence, but nothing sexual that I remember from the first episode. So
Okay.
I don't want to give it the full seal of approval, only seeing 25% of it, but
Sure. Yeah.
all the light we cannot see.
There you go. I'm also going to go with a movie adaptation of a book. This is Surprised by Oxford, another book that my wife read. We watched the movie version of it that just recently came out, and I thought it was pretty good. My wife was disappointed because it wasn't as good as the book, which, I mean, movies almost never are.
You just can't do the same amount of detail.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's the story of this American woman who is not a believer, grew up with a nominally Catholic mother, goes off to Oxford in the UK to study for her PhD. And while she's there, she meets this guy who is a believer. And she is at best an agnostic. And the movie kind of charts her eventual conversion to Christianity as a result of being around this young man that she ends up eventually marrying, which is interesting. But it's beautifully shot. I mean, it is stunning pictures of Oxford and just gorgeous English countryside stuff. But an interesting fact about this book, about this movie and book. So the guy that she falls in love with, he is, from what I understand, he is the son of a guy who wrote the book Tender Warrior. You familiar with that book? There's a big Christian. No. This is before your time, but like in the late 80s, early 90s, it was like one of the leading kind of Christian manhood books. It's called Tender Warrior, and I believe the guy that wrote it was named Stu Weber. It's his son that is the real. This is a real life story. It's a true life story. So we enjoyed that. See, this is one of the challenges with Christian movies, as we all know. They don't make her conversion all that explicit. Like, it's there,
yeah,
but it's not explicit. But again, I think it's one of those things where the movie makers probably don't want to make it too explicit, because then it comes across as cheesy, you know what I mean, or preachy.
Yeah.
So I think those are difficult lines to walk in these kinds of movies. And I think they didn't want it to be this is a Christian movie. They wanted it to be a movie about a woman who becomes a Christian. And so I think that's probably the explanation for it. So that is Surprised by Oxford. And that is my one thing I liked.
Nice.
All right, John, we have talked about college and professional football, how the college football playoff committee has lost their mind. We've talked about the promise of a ruler from Bethlehem, from Micah 5:2, quoted in Matthew 2. We have talked about Klay Thompson scoring 60 points and only dribbling the ball 11 times. We have talked about a limited series on Netflix that you are watching called All the Light We Cannot See, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. We've talked about Surprised by Oxford. And so I think by definition, we have covered our various and sundry topics. And so all that's left to say is, until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.